Hi, I'm Roger Hanshaw, Speaker of the West Virginia House of Delegates. We're here this week on day 40 of the 2021 regular session of the legislature. It's unfortunate that we're not able to be together this year, but it has nevertheless been a productive and busy session for us this year, and I'm happy to take questions today and talk about what we've done so far this session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think our first question is one that impacts everybody, and it's an ongoing situation. How has COVID and the closed Capitol impacted this session and the people's participation in the House of Delegates process?
Well, coronavirus has had a profound impact on our session this year. It began with our preparation for the session. We had to make arrangements for our committees to meet in as socially distant a manner as possible, so our committee process has been largely confined either to the House chamber itself or to the committee room used usually by the House Committee on Government Organization. Those are the two biggest spaces that we have here in the House end of the building. Our public hearing process has had to be taken to an online format and a virtual platform this year. We've been unable to have sort of the usual public hearings that we have here in the House on certain bills. We've had to close our galleries to visitors and guests this year to comply with the executive orders issued to keep the building closed for coronavirus this year. And we also have dedicated those spaces to members who wanted to have some physical separation and physical distance to keep themselves safe. Those continue. They continue right up until today. We're practicing those same practices in the final 19 days here of the legislature this session. So we have had to learn a lot about how to operate the House remotely, how to physically separate people as much as possible. We hope we'll never be in this situation again, but if we ever have to, we've learned a lot about how to do it.
Mr. Speaker, after 40 days, do you think the public participation and access has been adequate, or has that been a problem?
We think that anyone who has wanted access to the Capitol and has wanted to interact and interface with legislators, at least here in the House, has had an opportunity to do that. So most of West Virginia doesn't come to the legislature during the regular session anyway. Most folks who don't live in Kanawha County or the surrounding vicinity interact with their members and their representatives remotely anyway. They talk to us by phone, they talk to us by email, they visit us at home when we're back at home in our districts on the weekends. When someone does want to come from a part of West Virginia which is remote to the Capitol, they often make appointments with our members when they come here, and they're still able to do that, and they've been able to do that the entire time, and they'll be able to do that the entire rest of the 19 days of this session. So we have, to the best of my knowledge, we have not denied anyone entry into the Capitol who had an appointment to see a member or who had testimony to offer to one of our committees this year. We know that we've not been able to have people just simply in the halls and popping into committee meetings or popping into the House while we've been in session this year. We always like to welcome visitors and guests. We haven't been able to do that this year, but citizens who've wanted to be here and actually engage with their representatives, I think have had an opportunity to do that.
In related legislation, Senate Bill 277, which is the COVID Immunity Act, well, started as COVID Immunity Act and ended as the COVID Jobs Protection Act, was one of the first bills to complete legislation. Can you tell us why that was so important, and are you happy with the final version?
Sure. So we hope that this coronavirus situation is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation event. It's something that most of us have never lived through before, and we hope we'll never live through again. And because of that, the circumstances in society that gave rise to that bill just created situations without comparison. So the liability that potentially raises for business owners and even employees is staggering. And as we talk about the economic recovery for West Virginia and the nation, on the other side of this pandemic, part of that is making sure that we have jobs and employers to go back to. So states all across the country have taken up legislation that looks and feels similar to this particular bill that we've taken up and sent to the governor here this session. California, Texas, New York, a wide range of states, large and small, liberal and conservative, urban and rural, have considered bills like this and sent them onto their executive for action. West Virginia is not an outlier in that. We're right in the middle with respect to what we have done. So the bill we passed is not an absolute bar to litigation. It's not an absolute an absolute blanket immunity. It just simply sets up a standard that says, listen, for coronavirus situations, there's not liability.
You mentioned jobs and economic growth, the economic impact of COVID. And somewhat of a related bill, HB 2019 elevated the Economic Development and Tourism Departments to cabinet post. That's through the process signed by the governor. Why was that change necessary?
So that bill is one of the governor's signature pieces of legislation this session. It's a priority bill for Governor Justice. We're happy to have been able to get that down to his desk. The governor's message on this bill to us was a simple one. He said to us, when I send my representative, the people's representative on behalf of the state of West Virginia, to the office of a Fortune 500 company to meet with the CEO and say, come to West Virginia, consider West Virginia as a place for expansion, the governor wants that person to carry the absolute full weight of the state of West Virginia, the full weight of the executive branch when she or he is making that pitch to a Fortune 500 CEO. And to do so, the governor felt like it was very important that that person carry the title of Secretary of Economic Development. And the bill was a no-cost change to the organization of the Department of Commerce. The bill had no fiscal note. It did not create a new position. It simply changed the title of the person who fills that role to Secretary of Economic Development. I voted for the bill. I'm listed as a sponsor on the bill on behalf of the governor, and I was happy that I was.
HB 2001, you were also listed as the primary sponsor. I didn't think that was the governor's bill. I thought more that was one of the bills you championed, but I want to be sure. West Virginia Jumpstart Savings Program has completed process, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'd like to say I championed it. I did sponsor the bill, but that's actually Treasurer Riley Moore's bill. So the Treasurer campaigned on this issue all last year, and the purpose of that bill is to create a mechanism for students in West Virginia who want to enter a trade post-high school to take advantage of the same kind of savings opportunities that the 529 savings plan makes available for students who want to enroll in four-year college programs. The treasurer, he speaks very eloquently about his own experience having gone into the welding trades as a young man. And he learned firsthand the importance of having a mechanism available to save for things like vocational training, purchase of tools, purchase of equipment, business startup costs, all of which kept him from being able to enter into the business he wanted to start and expand when he was a young person. This is a good bill for our economy. It's a good bill for our students. I'm really happy the governor signed this bill.
In your viewpoint, in terms of how other House bills, what are some of the most crucial pieces of legislation that have passed to this point?
That have passed? Oh gosh. So, sure. So we have taken up a number of reforms to occupational licensing here in West Virginia, Don. We want to make sure that our borders are as open as we can make them to men and women who want to come here and work. Anything that we can do to put people on a payroll in West Virginia we think is a good thing. So we've been very happy to make that happen. With this coming week, we are taking up in our Committee on Finance the Intermediate Court of Appeals bill. That bill has passed out of our Committee on the Judiciary already. This would bring West Virginia into line with almost every other state in America in terms of the structure of our judiciary. We're also taking up this week proposals for elimination of the personal income tax in West Virginia. There's an awful lot of ongoing discussion about those various proposals. What action the House will take on that later this week remains to be decided, but it's been the subject of probably more discussion than anything that we've undertaken this session.
One of my follow-up questions were the chances of the personal income tax. So right now it's still in discussion, and really it's just we have to wait. It's a wait and see situation.
It is still in discussion. It likely will be in discussion for the full 60 days here this year. You know, when we talk about something as big as half the entire state's general revenue budget, that it's not a decision that we can make lightly or quickly, for that matter. We have to make sure we have data. We have to make sure we've modeled out appropriate scenarios for all the various options that supporters of various proposals have given us for consideration, including the governor. We've taken seriously the governor's proposal. We've taken seriously proposals advanced by senators, by delegates, by citizen groups, by industry, trade associations. We want to get this right. We know that there is a correlation between states that have no income tax and economic and population growth, not just economic growth, but population growth. So we are taking that seriously, but we are not doing it quickly.
There have been several education bills that have been considered this session. Are you happy with the way they're moving?
Public education remains the single biggest expenditure of state resources that we have here in our general revenue budget. It's over half of the general revenue budget spent by the state of West Virginia every year. This pandemic that we've gone through over the course of the past year has underscored the need to make sure that we're doing everything we can in public education to give parents a say in educational choice, to give classroom teachers and principals as much flexibility and say as possible in how they structure their teaching environment. One area that we've not taken up as much this year in public education that I know now we need to take up is how we allow classroom teachers to structure their teaching environment to combine both remote and in-person learning. So one of the things we've learned this year is that we've still got some work to do there that we've not yet been able to tackle this session.
Very good. With 3 weeks to go, or a couple weeks to go anyway, what are key pieces of legislation you hope to see move? What do you hope ends up law?
Oh goodness, there are so many things we've worked on this year, Don. So still to make its way through the process here on the House side of the building is the Senate bill creating our Intermediate Court of Appeals. I spoke about that just a moment ago. That's a critical piece of legislation in terms of our overall economic development agenda here in West Virginia. We have two House concurrent resolutions that are now pending in the Senate that we certainly hope will be taken up by the Senate. Those are resolutions to reform the rulemaking process for the state Board of Education, bringing that rulemaking authority under the umbrella of the legislative rulemaking review process, as well as a resolution to clarify the what I've spoken about often as erroneous decision by the state Supreme Court in the case of Workman v. Carmichael from several years ago. Those are now pending in the Senate. Pending in the House is another constitutional amendment resolution that we intend to take up here in the House later this week, and that's a resolution enabling the legislature at a future point in time to take steps necessary to eliminate the state's tax on business equipment and inventory. We know that all the studies nationally show that to be the #1 job-killing tax in America. West Virginia is one of the states that still has that tax. We have it constitutionally, and there's a constitutional change required before we can take steps to remove that tax. That resolution we hope will leave the House later this week, and we're hopeful that that one passes the Senate too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One final question for the newspaper industry. There are a lot of public notice bills this year. Some have moved, some have not. What are your thoughts on the situation with public notice in West Virginia right now?
Sure, there are those bills that get advanced every year. I think they're all part of an ongoing conversation about how do West Virginians and citizens and businesses in our state access their information in the 21st century. How do we make sure that citizens in all parts of West Virginia are aware of what's going on in their community? So for so many of us, myself included, the rural district that I represent, the small weekly newspapers represent one of the greatest sources of information available to the residents. They're prized every week. They're bought at gas stations and delivered to homes, and they spend the entire week on the coffee table of a family living room. And because they're there for the full week, people flip through them and they see public notices that they may not otherwise have seen. But as we sort of move into the 21st century, and we're now well into a 21st century economy, we have to ask, how are we making sure that people are getting access to that information? So do we need to be posting it just in newspapers? Do we need to be posting it just online? Do we need some hybrid of the two? And I don't feel strongly that we'll have one of those bills move forward this session. I'm not aware of one that has gained a lot of traction for consideration this year in the 19 days that we have remaining in the session. But if I were going to look into a crystal ball and speculate about what the future holds for public notice, I think it likely in the short term would include some hybrid model of physical publication for some amount of time, as well as posting on some online platform sponsored by the state, because we know that society is transitioning to that kind of a format.
Sir, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Good luck in these final days.
Yes, sir.